The 19th and 20th centuries were a time of seismic change in the Middle East. Outdated state institutions, which had derived their legitimacy from the monarch and the Ulema, began to decay until collapse. The ever-expanding deficit in efficiency and innovation between Europe and Middle Eastern states became evident when new colonial powers began poaching for historic ports and trade routes. By the early 20th century, an Ottoman or Persian citizen would have seen a state that governed poorly or a state that no longer governed at all, whilst foreign troops occupied the edges of those empires before encroaching on the center. This disillusionment with ancient indigenous institutions caused the intelligentsia of the day to look westward. If Europe dominates the world and dominates our countries, they must be doing something we're not. As imperial collapse transitioned into European colonialism, an indigenous answer to their efficiency and ethos that had created this dynamic was required. The sultans and sheikhs of old did not prove up to the challenge, so a new idea had to be introduced to unite the masses and reconstitute Turkish, Arab, and Iranian society. Ironically, the ideological response conjured up to combat European encroachment was the very same one born in and popularized by Europe: nationalism. Before we delve into the history of it, let's first examine the philosophy behind nationalism. Nationalism is the belief that the nation and the state are intertwined. The state is no longer a large-scale tax farmer, but the defender of the preservation and interests of the nation, an entity bound together by a shared identity. This identity is formed through history, language, culture, territory, or in even rarer cases, religion. Traditionally, nationalism supposed that the nation is not invented, but rather primordial and natural. The ideology holds that the nation had glorious ancestors who accomplished glorious feats. Thus, members of the nation feel motivated and capable of asserting themselves on the world stage. Generally, there are two types of nationalisms: the political territorial and the ethnic organic. The political territorial school of thought asserts the unity of all those living on a certain piece of land, while the latter posits that those who speak the same language and share the same culture, even across disparate lands, are one people and should be reconstituted as such. Both of these ideas were practiced by different Middle Eastern nationalists, oftentimes with great contradictions. Even if it would prove to produce practical problems, nationalism was the dominant ideology of the Middle Eastern masses during the quest for independence. Logically, it was also the main ideology of the states that emerged after liberation was achieved. For a variety of reasons that will be discussed, nationalism was sidelined in this region by other ideologies in the late 20th century. But its effects have profoundly shaped Middle Eastern society and politics. To understand the intricate situation, one must analyze nationalism's history here, from its birth at the turn of the 20th century, its zenith in the middle, and its decline by the century's close. At the beginning of the 19th century, nationalism stepped up to fill the vacuum left by religion's absence in politics throughout Europe. At the same time, some of the Ottomans' Balkan territories were clamoring for independence. First the Serbs, then the Greeks, and so on. With Ottoman foes like the Russians giving key aid to these separatist movements, the Sultan began to lose his territories in the Balkans. Being the adept empire builders they were, the Ottomans soon realized the necessity of resolving ethnic and social tensions before they eat the empire from within. As a result, the Ottomans launched the Tanzimat reforms in order to modernize the empire. Along with institutional changes, the biggest change was ideological. Instead of a patchwork of religious communities, or millets, the empire promoted Ottomanism, a shared civic identity. Non-Muslims were declared equal under the law and now had civic duties, including conscription and community leaders swearing oaths of loyalty to the Sultan. By 1876, the reforms seemed to be working, as a constitution and an elected parliament were introduced. Despite this, ethnic tensions persisted. Not long after, when uprisings broke out in the Balkans, the Ottomans responded harshly. Russia and Romania intervened, seizing land in the Caucasus and Balkans, and helping to create an autonomous Bulgaria. Suddenly, everything was being undone. Sultan Abdulhamid, once a supporter of reform, shut down the parliament and ruled with an iron fist. He expanded infrastructure but crushed political dissent, alienating the very groups the empire needed to hold together. This did, however, allow him to gain a hold of his faltering empire for the next 3 decades. But in 1908, after decades of the Hamidian police state, a group of officers known as the Young Turks staged a coup. The Young Turks themselves succumbed to a counter-coup after rigging elections in 1912. Meanwhile, the empire was besieged. Italy invaded Libya, and Balkan states, long eyeing Ottoman land, launched a joint assault to terminate the Eternal Empire's presence in Europe once and for all. Despite the empire's size, their forces were crushed within a year. On top of losing nearly all European holdings, the Ottoman failure to protect and evacuate Balkan Muslims led to mass ethnic cleansing, causing public outrage that the Young Turks used to reclaim power. This unassuming shift would set the stage for a new Middle East. Rather than interpret their defeat as a failure of Ottoman statecraft, the CUP came to detest Ottomanist ideology. Instead of the different millets uniting around the palace, certain groups would now be prioritized. For the Young Turks, the empire was a Muslim/Turkish enterprise, not a pluralistic one, so allegiance was defined by religion and ethnicity, not citizenship. This ideological shift showed in state policy. Before 1912, mentions of religion in atrocity reports were banned to maintain harmony. After the Young Turks' rise, the press emphasized sectarian conflict in the Balkans, and inflammatory speeches began targeting Christian minorities in Anatolia, despite their long coexistence with Muslims in the region. The imposition of a Balkan context was inevitable when considering the experiences of 2 of the 3 pashas, Talat and Enver, who now unilaterally ran the empire. As a child, Talat's home in what is now Bulgaria was occupied by Russian troops, and in 1912, Bulgarian forces seized his town, massacring Muslims. Born in North Macedonia to a Turkish Albanian family, Enver fought at least 54 battles against Bulgarian insurgents, whose nationalist ambitions ironically inspired him. Later on, the conquest and ethnic cleansing of his home province by Serbian troops only hardened his views. No person represents the transition from Ottomanism to Turkish nationalism better than Ziya Gökalp, the thinker considered the father of Turkish sociology and a convert to nationalist thought after the Balkan catastrophe. The aforementioned geographic nationalism was illogical to Gökalp, for he saw a unified culture as the key to a unified national conscience. With the flow of refugees into Anatolia and the feeling that the empire was on the brink permeating the public conscience, Gökalp envisioned Anatolia as the homeland for the area's Turks and the Muslim refugees from the Caucasus and the Balkans, who would be Turkicized in due time. This became the ideological basis for modern Turkey. Ataturk, the republic's founder, reportedly called Gökalp the father of his thought. Gökalp, who saw Greeks, Armenians and Jews as undesirable, influenced policy even before Ataturk. He was close to Talaat Paşa, who in 1913 deported 200,000 Anatolian Greeks, just the beginning of Anatolian Christians' bitter experience. Beyond demographic change, cultural Turkification was imposed, even in areas where Turks were the minority, fueling further unrest in the ailing empire. Before discussing Ataturk, we must consider why Ottomanism collapsed so rapidly. First and foremost, governance was inept, thereby undermining trust in reform. Integration of the millets also never really took form. Christians faced unofficial discrimination, and Muslims dominated the government. Additionally, religious segregation in schools hindered the formation of a shared identity. Meanwhile, groups like the Armenians lost their former privileges in the name of equality. Once known as the loyal millet, many Armenians began turning towards nationalism. Conversely, many Muslims felt blindsided by Christian commercial dominance. In the Ottoman Empire, there were capitulations. These bilateral agreements were struck during the heyday of the Sublime Porte, when the Ottomans were militarily dominant. They offered European traders entering the empire exemption from prosecution, taxation, conscription, and more. When the balance of power shifted to European states, they used them to prey on Ottoman ports and resources. Furthermore, powers such as Russia and France extended citizenship and therefore capitulations to many Ottoman Christians. The Christian control of commerce that ensued caused mass resentment amongst Muslims. The Republic of Turkey is by far the most successful example of nationalism's implementation in the Middle East, though not without pitfalls. Following the Ottoman defeat, Anatolia was to be split between the British, Greeks, French, Italians, and Armenians, with a rump state left under Ottoman control. Turks rejected the colonization of their land, and Mustafa Kemal Pasha organized a new government and army in Ankara to expel the occupiers. He beat the French, Armenians, and Greeks, while the British and Italians agreed to evacuate. The Treaty of Lausanne, which guaranteed Turkey's borders, was signed in 1923. As Gökalp envisioned, Anatolia became a nation-state for the Turkish people. Mustafa Kemal's credibility as a liberator allowed him to make sweeping reforms. His political ideology can be encapsulated through the 6 arrows, with perhaps the 2 most consequential being nationalism and laicism, which can be thought of as a more aggressive version of secularism. An ardent secularist, he abolished the Ottoman Khilafah. His reforms espoused Western and nationalist ideals. For example, in place of Perso-Arabic, the alphabet was now Latin, which exponentially increased literacy. There was also forced westernization of dress, and traditional Ottoman music was shunned for the sake of Western-sounding songs or folk tunes. Women's rights were expanded and an active role for enlightened women in society was encouraged. Language was central to Ataturk's program. A campaign to enforce Turkish in public spaces included fines for using foreign languages. With that, a state-funded effort sought to purge Arabic and Persian words, replacing them with indigenous or sometimes French alternatives. When too many loanwords remained, the Sun language theory was developed, claiming all languages originated from a Proto-Turkic source. There was an attempt to present the Republic as the culmination of Turkic history, even retroactively claiming the ancient Anatolians were Turks. This was of course a ridiculous claim to make, since Anatolia's Turkification really started in the 11th century with the Seljuks. But it did not matter, because it was Mustafa Kemal who built the Turkish state and institutions. It was he who restored diplomatic weight after decades of foreign domination. For recovering Anatolia and modernizing the country, he was given the surname Ataturk, father of the Turks. Today, he is Turkey's national hero. Ataturk's elite reputation and previous Tanzimat reforms were key to his success, and though he was said to be a dictator to end all dictators, authoritarianism in Turkey lasted. Ataturk entrusted the military to preserve his secular, nationalist order. This meant that when an undesirable government, often Islamically oriented, was elected, they would become the victims of a coup d'etat. This dogmatic adherence to secularism alienated many rural and conservative citizens, causing the slow formation of Islamist parties. Materially, the government catered to the Mediterranean secular elite, while interior religious Turkey was neglected. Adding on, attempts to form a unitary Turkish identity were resisted by Kurds, who are a majority in the southeast of the country. After a number of Kurdish rebellions were put down in the 1920s and 30s, the region was ruled by martial law until 1952. The Kurds faced an attack on their very cultural identity as the Turkish government took extreme measures to Turkicize them. In the 1980s, the Kurdish language was even banned as President Evren denied their existence, instead referring to them as Mountain Turks. This tension between the state and a large minority led to a bloody conflict in 1978 that only ended in May 2025, with more than 40,000 people losing their lives and tens of billions of dollars spent by the government. Overall, Turkey under military rule stagnated. That was until Recep Tayyip Erdogan was elected in 2003. Under his guardianship, the Turkish economy boomed at one point as he eroded the dominance of the military over politics. It's quite telling that Erdogan has reoriented Turkey's identity to be closer to its Islamic heritage rather than the secular state preferred by Ataturk. Contrary to the economic success of the early 2000s, the Turkish economy has been undergoing a crisis since 2018 that has seen the value of its currency, the lira, plummet. Considering this turmoil, it will be interesting to see how Turkish politics develops, especially since more and more Turks become disillusioned with Erdogan's tight grip on power. As we should know by now, wherever there is economic and political disarray, nationalism can serve as a convenient tool to galvanize the people. The Arab world, largely under Ottoman rule since the 16th century, faced an identity crisis as modern European advancement exposed its stagnation. Napoleon's 1798 invasion of Egypt was a wake-up call, symbolized by French cannons destroying Mamluks on camelback. Though short-lived, his expedition sparked an intellectual revival movement known as Al-Nahda. One of its early pioneers, the Egyptian Rifa al-Tahtawi, lived in France for 5 years as part of a student mission sent to Europe in order to learn its secrets. He praised French society's Enlightenment values while maintaining their compatibility with Islam. This blend of admiration for Europe and pride in Arab traditions became a hallmark of Arab nationalism. The spread of print media furthered this movement, uniting Arabs through language and culture, whilst emphasizing Arab identity over sectarian divides. Figures like the Lebanese journalist and novelist Georgi El-Zaidan popularized Arab history through accessible literature, reinforcing a shared national consciousness. He was only one in a long list of Arab intellectuals across the Middle East who helped build the founding blocks of modern Arab consciousness, and in the process, nationalism. As the intellectual revival spread, resentment toward Ottoman rule grew. This dissatisfaction was fueled by harsh taxation, which came with little to no state services in rural areas, forced conscription in peacetime to faraway lands, and bloody crackdowns on revolts in Karak, Shobak, and Jabal al-Druz. In spite of this, most Arabs remained loyal to the empire, seeking reform rather than independence. Arab nationalists opposed policies like Turkification and sought greater autonomy, with some even advocating for a dual Arab-Turkish sultanate akin to Austria-Hungary. Yet the young Turk rulers of the Ottoman Empire had little tolerance for dissent. By World War I, some Arab nationalists had begun considering full independence. The Ottoman entry into World War I was internalized by the Young Turks as an opportunity to reclaim lost territories and reshape the empire. Aligning with Germany and Austria-Hungary, they launched campaigns in the Caucasus, Egypt, and Mesopotamia. Egypt was lost to the British decades earlier, and Iraq could be used as a launching pad for attacks on the British in the Persian Gulf. However, overextension proved disastrous. Enver Pasha's poorly planned offensive in the Kafkas in the harsh winter months, which lasted from December 1914 to January 1915, led to massive Ottoman losses, mostly due to cold and disease. Jamal Pasha's attack on the Suez Canal also failed, as his forces were outmatched. Meanwhile, the British were steadily advancing in Iraq. Instead of reassessing strategy, Enver Pasha blamed the Armenians, some of whom had sided with the Russians. Though this wasn't the case for the majority, with an Armenian soldier even saving Enver Pasha's life by carrying him across battle lines on his back. Jamal Pasha, who essentially ruled the Levant, grew suspicious of Arab loyalty after failing to raise enough troops for his campaign. This suspicion escalated into genocide. Talaat Pasha ordered the deportation of Armenians, Greeks, and Assyrians from Anatolia, subjecting them to brutal death marches where over 1 million perished. In the Levant, Jamal Pasha imposed harsh food rationing, worsening famine, and cracked down on Arab intellectuals. A raid on the French consulates in Beirut and Damascus allegedly uncovered nationalist ties to the French, leading to mass arrests. With this excuse in hand, Jamal Pasha publicly executed 21 Arab intellectuals on May 8, 1916. Many of those hanged were former MPs and sons of important families. This was the final straw for Arab nationalists and a turning point that pushed many towards independence. This is where Sharif Hussein comes in. As the head of the Hashemite household and autonomous ruler of Mecca and the Hijaz, he had secretly corresponded with British High Commissioner Henry McMahon. Hussein negotiated British support for an independent Arab kingdom in exchange for a rebellion against the Ottomans. Initially hesitant, Hussein launched the Arab revolt after the aforementioned executions, rallying forces in Arabia with Ottoman Arab defectors and British support, including the famous T.E. Lawrence. Many of the revolt participants would become important in the newly formed Arab states and national movements. By 1917, Hussein controlled most of the Hijaz, while British forces advanced in Palestine and Iraq, dealing major blows to the Ottomans. By 1918, Arab forces reached Transjordan and linked up with the Allies. With Germany and Austria-Hungary near collapse and the Ottoman state bankrupt, an armistice was signed on October 30th. The region's future, completely changed, would now be shaped by nationalist ideology. After the region emerged from the rubble of war, Arab nationalists were disillusioned to learn that the British had betrayed them by secretly dividing Arab lands with the French in the infamous Sykes-Picot Agreement. In 1920, Faisal, son of Hussein, attempted to establish the Arab Kingdom of Syria, which included modern-day Jordan and Syria, as well as claiming Lebanon and Palestine. This state lasted only 4 months, as French forces crushed a hastily assembled Arab army at Maysalun and marched into Damascus. After Faisal was exiled to Iraq, where the British crowned him, his brother Abdullah marched towards Syria to reclaim the kingdom, but instead, he was offered Transjordan, now known as Jordan, as a consolation prize. Though the battle ended quickly, the vision endured. The experience fueled cynicism toward the West. Arab nationalism became focused on removing European colonialism and their perceived local allies. Revolts and strikes against the imperialists, peaceful and violent, broke out across the Fertile Crescent. By the time independence arrived in the 1940s and 50s, Arab nationalism was the region's dominant ideology. However, its narrow focus on expelling Western powers often sidelined the broader reformist goals of the Al-Nahda, which sought to achieve a social, political, and cultural awakening. To illustrate, the fallen Kingdom of Syria held democratic elections and appointed officials by merit. By contrast, most post-independence nationalist regimes became nepotistic military dictatorships. Another key nationalism also emerged in this period, a foreign one which was imported into the region and brought with it long-lasting conflict: Zionism. Developed in 19th century Europe, it sought a Jewish state to protect Jews from persecution. In 1917, British Foreign Secretary Lord Balfour promised Palestine as a homeland for the Jewish people. Afterward, Jewish immigration to the British Mandate of Palestine increased, leading to growing tension and economic exclusion of Palestinians. Protests and revolts were violently suppressed. In 1947, the UN proposed partitioning Palestine between Arabs and Jews, even though the latter made up only 36% of the population and owned 6% of the land. Arab states rejected the plan and declared war on the new state of Israel, but their armies were weak, disorganized, and divided by conflicting interests. Israel not only preserved its UN share, but expanded into half of the Arab portion. The remaining territory was split between the West Bank, defended by Transjordanian and Iraqi troops, and later annexed by Jordan, as well as the Gaza Strip, which would now be controlled by Egypt. In the process, 700,000 Palestinians were expelled, over 500 communities razed, and 11,000 people killed. This event, known as the Nakba, galvanized Arab nationalism. Recovering Palestine became a core goal of the ideology. Disillusioned by post-colonial governments' ineffectiveness, Arab militaries began seizing power. The most iconic case was Jamal Abdel Nasser and the Free Officers Movement. After being besieged by Israeli troops in 1948, Nasser and his comrades felt that they, and by extension Palestine, were betrayed by their government. In 1952, they overthrew the unpopular pro-Western King Farouk, and Nasser emerged as Egypt's ruler. Backed by the military, he placed allies in power and suppressed communist and Islamist opposition. In 1956, Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, prompting an invasion by Britain, France, and Israel. Though Egypt was defeated militarily, the US and Soviet Union forced the invaders to withdraw. Nasser used his Voice of the Arabs radio station to frame this as a sweeping victory, and his popularity soared. Nasserist and Arab nationalist movements, especially the Baathists, staged coups in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Libya. They copied Nasser's model, a statist economy, military control, and no democracy. A brief union between Egypt and Syria from 1958 to 1961 collapsed, and the crushing Arab defeat in the Six-Day War of 1967 exposed the model's limitations. Arab nationalism steadily declined, overtaken by Islamism and nation-state ideologies. Yet its legacy lingered. Nasser's style of governance persisted in Egypt and survived in Iraq until 2003, in Libya until 2011, and in Syria until as recently as 2024. Under the Qajar dynasty, Persia suffered from many of the same woes that afflicted the Ottoman Empire throughout the 19th century. However, Persia's modernization process was even slower. The increasing gap in European and Middle Eastern military capabilities became apparent when Russia resoundingly defeated the Qajars twice, forcing them to cede control of the southern Caucasus. This region had been under Persian control for centuries, and the Shahs regarded it as integral to their domain in the same light as the Iranian mainland. Nasser al-Din Shah, who ruled from 1848, brought some modern technology to Iran, but the state remained rather feudal. With a standing army of only a few thousand soldiers, the country was essentially divided into fiefdoms, where local tribal chiefs and notables would tax farms. Oftentimes, they would abuse their power, and the anger of the citizens went to the monarch and his institution. Furthermore, because he did not have the means to enforce his laws, Nasser al-Din struggled to raise revenue for the state. The country's misery was seen as a golden opportunity for the two powers who coveted Persia, Russia and Britain, in order to gain an economic foothold. As in the Ottoman Empire, concessions and capitulations infested Persia and debilitated the country. In 1872, in a move that reeked of financial illiteracy, Nasser al-Din Shah sold a concession to Baron Julius Reuter, which gave him the sole right to construct mines, railways, dams, roads, and industrial plants at the price of $200,000, which is roughly equivalent to about $5 million today, as well as 60% of the profits. British statesman Lord Curzon called it the most complete and extraordinary surrender of the entire industrial resources of a kingdom into foreign hands that has probably ever been dreamed of, much less accomplished in history. Thankfully for Iran, public outrage reached the point that the Shah was forced to back down. When the Shah tried offering the control of the entire Persian tobacco trade to a Brit in 1891, the people had had enough. It was not only the state's coffers that suffered from concessions, but the citizens as well. The bazaris, merchants and artisans who once prospered could not compete against these extravagant monopolies, and the selling off of an industry that employed 200,000 people stung. The Grand Ayatollah of the land, Mirza Muhammad Hassan Shirazi, issued a fatwa banning tobacco's consumption, effectively starting a nationwide boycott. Commoners, clergy, merchants, and intellectuals threw their weight behind the protests. It's said that even the Shah's wives barred him from smoking. The concession was overturned, but this event was the start of something much bigger: Iranian nationalism. The entire nation, with all of its classes and ethnicities, had cooperated to overturn a foreign encroachment. Soon the people would identify the system itself as the problem, rather than just the Europeans. The Shah was assassinated in 1896, but change had not come about yet. Instead, it took yet another concession in 1905 to cause a revolution. The new monarch, Muzaffar al-Din Shah, continued in his father's footsteps by mismanaging the country's finances. In 1901, he sold a monopoly over oil exploration in central and southern Persia to British businessman William Darcy. This deal would play a big role in precipitating the revolutionary politics of Muhammad Mossadegh some 4 decades later. To make matters worse, the new Shah took out massive loans from Britain and Russia to pay for the government's expenditure. As a result, he was forced to hand over the entire customs system to a Belgian named Monsieur Naus. Rumors abounded that he would impose even steeper tariffs on the bazaris, setting the scene for a revolution in 1905. After some violence, defections ensued, and the Shah was forced to cave. He simply did not have the funds or manpower to stop the revolution. Soon, a parliament with sweeping powers was introduced. The Majlis, as it was known, was represented with many ideologies. And on December 30th, 1906, the Shah signed the constitution, which was modelled on the Belgian constitution. Amidst this political diversity, almost all factions had a nationalist tilt. A royalist coup in 1908 led by Muzaffar's successor, Muhammad Ali, briefly succeeded before being thrown out by mainly Bakhtiari tribal soldiers in 1909. But as is often the case with Middle Eastern states that initially enter into parliamentary democracy, the Majlis descended into internal conflict. The line separating the moderates and the liberals became more pronounced, as both sides dug their heels in and became less willing to compromise. The issue surrounding religiosity and secularism featured prominently. Seeing chaos reduce the central government to ineptitude, the provinces erupted in tribal warfare as various tribes and ethnicities tried to assert their own authority on their territories. The same tribal leaders who won the country back dominated different parts of Persia, negotiating separately with the foreigners and not enforcing state laws. Out of frustration, the Majlis was shut down in 1911 when a force of 12,000 Russian soldiers forced it to dissolve. The revolution might have been over, but for the desire and drive of a more representative and efficient form of governance in Iran, this was only the beginning. Over the course of the 20th century, there would be 2 more major revolutions that sought to achieve the aim set out by the constitutionalists at the beginning of the century. This democratic experiment, unique in the region, was spurred on by intellectuals who were sent on scholarships to study in France and Belgium. Apart from their degrees, they obtained an understanding of nationalism that would be integral to Iranian politics for decades to come. Like its French counterpart, Iranian nationalism was initially political territorial, focusing on the state of Iran and its sovereignty rather than ethnic ambitions. Moreover, dozens of newspapers sprung up during this 6-year period, which further spread a sense of unity and political awareness amongst Iranians from all walks of life. During World War I, Persia was occupied by the Ottomans, Russians, and British at various times. The economy was ruined, and many peasants were now forced laborers for the army, causing a famine that killed up to 2 million people. The inability of the Qajars to defend and maintain the country's sovereignty led to a certain Reza Pahlavi, head of the elite Cossack brigade, to mount a coup in 1921. In 1925, he declared himself Shah and embarked on modernizing the country by building infrastructure, expanding education, and creating a real military. Western influences on Reza Shah were clearly visible over his near 20-year reign of Iran. The nation went into a significantly more secular direction, as seen through his decisions to shut down many Islamic madrasas and Christian missionary schools, and his royal decree prohibiting women from wearing the traditional Islamic chador. He also sought to unify the country under a Persian identity at the expense of the country's minorities, and ruled absolutely. Modernizing autocrats in this period viewed the homogenization of their state as a key principle of nation building. In fact, the modern name Iran, meaning the land of the Aryans, was adopted in 1935, displaying the nationalist trend occurring at this time. Reza Shah's reign ended abruptly when he refused to disavow relations with Germany in World War II, leading to his overthrow by a Soviet-British invasion in 1941. His son, Mohammad Reza Shah, also embarked on a modernization program whilst ruling as a ruthless autocrat. He aimed to promote himself as the benevolent ruler of a new Persian empire, but could not shake off the allegations that he was a Western puppet by his people. Especially pertinent to this is when Mohammad Mossadegh was elected Prime Minister in 1951. Mossadegh ran on nationalizing the oil industry. In yet another comical concession, the British retained the vast majority of profits made from Iranian oil. He did this successfully and was wildly popular for it. Unfortunately, the price he had to pay was the MI6 and CIA collaborating with royalists to overthrow him in 1953, restoring Mohammad Reza Shah to absolute rule. The second part of the Shah's reign would see him take Iran's modernization into high gear, due to the increased stake in its own oil, which had been renegotiated to 50% in the aftermath of the fiasco with Mossadegh. In 1963, the Shah introduced the White Revolution, a series of sweeping reforms centered on land reform. Iran experienced a level of prosperity not seen in over 2 centuries, as the nation saw an annual growth of nearly 10%. Eventually, the Pahlavis' corruption took away from their credibility as reformers. So too did the repressive atmosphere cultivated by the Shah's Savak secret police. This political climate, coupled with an economic downturn in 1977, led to revolution in 1978. Under the leadership of the enigmatic Ayatollah Khomeini, the Ulema redirected the revolutionary energy into a theocratic direction. The modern Islamic Republic of Iran was born in 1979. As a result, the power of nationalism has been contained by the Ayatollah's regime. But with a history as rich as Iran's, and a national consciousness as alive as in Iran, do not be surprised if nationalism makes a comeback. Nationalism in the Middle East is a unique case. It dominated politics for much of the 20th century, but by the end of the millennium, it had lost popular support in the Arab world, Turkey, and Iran. What went wrong? In short, nationalism, borrowed from Europe, was applied to the region without adapting to local realities. This clashed with deeply rooted societal norms. For a movement claiming to defend the people, it often sidelined their way of life and well-being. The most prevalent conflict between nationalist ideology and Middle Eastern society was over the role of religion. Recall that in Europe, nationalism arose when religious institutions had fallen out of relevance, but this change never occurred in the Middle East. Replacing Islam's role in society was impossible, and reconciling it to secular nation-state ideology proved difficult. In all three of our contexts, nationalist regimes were faced with Islamist dissent, which they brutally repressed. Nevertheless, Islamism naturally emerged as a leading ideology when said regimes began to falter. In some cases, nationalists were replaced by Islamists via elections, such as in Turkey, civil disobedience, like in Iran, or armed insurrection, like in Syria. Another fundamental fact about many Middle Eastern societies that ethno-nationalists could not change was that they were diverse. Attempts to enforce cultural uniformity usually backfired. The Kurds, split among Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Syria, faced loss of citizenship, language bans, and harsh repression. These policies sparked violent conflicts. Saddam's response to Kurdish separatism culminated in the chemical massacre of tens of thousands in 1988, leading to a successful uprising in 1991. In contrast, part of Islamism's appeal in Turkey lay in its ability to unite Kurds and Turks via their shared religion. Ideological gaps aside, core aspects of Western political culture that are arguably responsible for their developed states, like rights and freedoms, pluralism, and checks and balances, were largely ignored, with nationalists only paying lip service to Enlightenment values. Governments that reject multiple perspectives ultimately fail to meet the needs of their people. A perfect representation of this was economic turmoil, for nationalist regimes often struggled to improve living standards. In Turkey, economic discontent in Anatolia and the southern borderlands helped fuel Islamism's rise. The country's Human Development Index remained low in the 1980s and 90s, comparable to Arab states in the Fertile Crescent, and only improved significantly under the Islamist-influenced AKP. Syria's Human Development Index was even worse. It lagged behind smaller, resource-poor neighbors like Lebanon and Jordan, with some governorates as underdeveloped as the world's poorest countries. That being said, economic success alone doesn't guarantee political stability, which nationalists often overlooked. In Saddam Hussein's Iraq, the South was developed to win Shia support during the Iran-Iraq War, even as he brutally repressed Shia community figures. The strategy held until sanctions and post-Gulf War hardship sparked revolt. Saddam barely clung to power, and his divisive policies fueled sectarian violence after 2003. Similarly, the last Shah of Iran used oil wealth to fund reforms and appease elites whilst relying on brutal repression. When oil prices fell, the economy collapsed along with his regime. Economic and political development must go hand in hand. Tying ideological and practical failures together, the nationalist regimes simply feared their people. Regardless of one's opinions on their ideas, one must acknowledge that what they were implementing was new and revolutionary. Conscious of the opposition that secular nationalist reforms could spark, the regimes relied on nepotism to secure loyalty, which proved disastrous. Nasser filled Egypt's military leadership with close friends, contributing to Egypt's humiliating defeats in 1956 and 1967. Nepotism also bred corruption, deepening public resentment. In Syria, Bashar al-Assad's cousin monopolized all telecommunications and duty-free shops. His ostentatious wealth sparked outrage, especially during famine in the lead-up to the revolution. In conclusion, understanding the history of nationalism in the Middle East is key to understanding the region's current situation. Along with the figures, governments, and borders that nationalism brought, it also shaped how the region's inhabitants conceive of their histories and identities. As mentioned in the intro, nationalism pushes the idea that those who live on the same land or speak the same language are bound together by a shared history and destiny. In this sense, nationalism has shaped the mentalities of individuals along with the state of societies. Even though it had its flaws, nationalism's history in the Middle East displays its ability to unite millions at once, especially in the face of foreign imperialism. More importantly, we need to recognize where nationalism fell short and how, so the diverse peoples of the Middle East may commit to a better future without making the mistakes of the past. Thank you guys for watching. I want to thank my Patreons for always supporting. If you want to financially support Hikmah History, there's a link to my Patreon in the description to this video. Until next time, peace!